The Florida Podcast Network, the voice of Florida.
And hello, everybody. Welcome to episode number 68 of Beach Talk Radio. This is a special edition of Beach Talk Radio, audio only. And our special guest today is Brian Norris. Brian is the Public Information Officer for the Florida Fish and Wildlife Division. He's in the Law Enforcement Division. And Brian, we want to thank you for coming on. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
So, Brian, the first question that Kim and I have for you is, what do you do?
Well, I work for Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, and I am a law enforcement officer, but I'm also the public information officer. So I handle all of the media inquiries, interviews, just kind of the liaison between the media and the Division of Law Enforcement for the Southwest Florida area.
Okay, and are you located, you're right here in Fort Myers, out of that office?
Yes, that's correct. I'm based out of the Fort Myers field office.
And then what area do you cover? Is it just all of Lee County?
So my area is Lee, Charlotte, Sarasota, Highlands, Hardee, and DeSoto counties as far as the public information officer responsibilities. I am also assigned as a regular patrol officer, and my primary area of responsibility is Charlotte County. Okay,
great. So we wanted to talk a little bit about the manatees because there's been quite a few deaths to date so far. It seems like the manatee deaths are out, on track to break the record this year in Florida, and Lee County being one of the highest. Is that true?
Yeah, that is unfortunately correct. We're seeing a higher than usual number of manatee fatalities due to vessel collisions, which is why we're really trying to get the message out there to the boating public and trying to raise awareness about how they can help and just educate them about what is going on, and it is something that is very preventable as long as everybody can kind of abide by the rules and guidelines we've laid out there.
So, Brian, is one of the reasons there are so many deaths because we have more manatees than any other area?
It's hard to say exactly why, but yes, we definitely do have a good, healthy population of manatees, specifically in Lee County. And this time of year, they kind of disperse all throughout Southwest Florida. They're not necessarily concentrated to one area, but anywhere there's shallow water with grass flats or a food source, you're likely to find manatees. And that may be inside of a designated manatee zone, and it may be outside of that. And so, it's very easy to kind of know where the manatees may be inside of the manatee zones. That's going to be the shallow water areas where there's the big signs. But outside of that, there's still the potential to see a manatee and, unfortunately, have a collision with a manatee.
And are the manatee deaths, are they equally distributed around the marine area, or are there more along in the Caloosahatchee or in the Gulf?
That is a good question, and I don't actually have the answer to that. That's something I'd have to check with our biologists on. But I do, from what I understand, I apologize for that.
That's okay.
You're so busy, Brian. He's getting calls now. Hopefully it's not about a manatee.
Sorry about that.
That's no okay.
From what I understand, they are kind of dispersed throughout the county, and really anywhere there's a shallow water grass flat where the water is maybe 5 foot or less, there's likely to be a manatee if there's a food source there. And so that's why it doesn't really matter if you're in Estero Bay, the Caloosahatchee River, Pine Island Sound, really anywhere where there's a grass flat or shallow water, especially just because that's where they're more prone to be struck by a vessel.
All right, and the boat strikes accounting for a great deal of injury and deaths to the manatees. What are some of the other contributing factors that might be posed by boats or other factors?
As far as to the mortality of the manatees?
Correct.
Well, as far as when the vessel strikes a manatee, there's the lungs are essentially on the back of the manatee, and so there's injuries that can be caused from the blunt force trauma of the vessel axle striking it, or it could be from a propeller. A lot of times we'll see different striations along the back of the manatee, or we call them prop scars. And unfortunately, on some of the older manatees, we'll see very old scars that they've been struck before, but they've been able to survive the injuries. And so it's not uncommon to find an older manatee that has numerous prop scars on it that they've been able to survive.
Now, what about, I was reading something about the boats destroying, when people aren't paying attention, destroying the grassy areas and messing up the feeding areas for the manatees, and then that causes issues as well. Is that true?
Maybe not necessarily just destroying the grass and making a limited supply of food for the manatees. Obviously, the seagrass provides a lot of nutrients and nourishment for a lot of species. It's a very important part, and so that's why in some areas seagrasses are protected, and intentional destruction of seagrasses is illegal. But when it comes to manatees, it's more that's an area where the manatees are likely to be, is in those shallow waters where the seagrasses are. And so that's why when we're talking about running vessels on plane in shallow water, it's to be mindful that there could be manatees in the area. And just because it's not a designated manatee zone doesn't mean that you shouldn't keep your eyes open and look for some signs that there may be manatees in the area, or maybe slow down just a little bit to try to avoid it. And
so I know the no wake zone. I see the signs up. I'm out in kayaking or on my paddleboard, and I will say not everybody is always observing those signs. If someone sees someone doing something inappropriate or questionable, who should they contact and how?
Well, they should definitely contact FWC, or Florida Fish and Wildlife. And the easiest number, or the easiest way to contact us, is to call our Wildlife Alert Hotline. And the number is 1-888-404-3922. Or they can just push star FWC on their cell phone, and that'll go to our dispatch, and they can explain what's going on. And then if it's something that we have an officer available for, they'll dispatch the closest officer. But, it may not be something we can immediately address. If there's a boat on plane in a manatee zone, they'll likely be gone by the time we get there. But we can then know that this area is somewhere we need to focus our efforts on, and that's what we're doing right now. Is we're trying to target those certain areas maybe where we're having more vessel strikes with manatees, and especially inside the manatee zones. And we're focusing our patrol efforts there to educate the public, and also if we find people that are repeat offenders or should know better, then citing them accordingly, just to try to get everybody in compliance and have these numbers stop rising like they are.
So, Brian, are people just being careless, or are they purposely trying to hurt the manatees, or do they think that they could get selfies with them or something? I mean, what's the biggest problem that you're having?
Well, I don't think anybody's intentionally trying to strike these manatees. At least I hope not. I think some of it is maybe a little bit of carelessness, maybe not, and also just not paying attention. And then some of it is with the manatees being slower and a lot of times, and they also frequent areas where there may be, paddleboarders or kayakers or even along the beach, especially visitors and locals alike, like to try to take that as an opportunity to get close to them, maybe have that very close-up experience and touch them and that sort of thing. And we really discourage that. And not only can that be harmful to the manatee, it is also illegal to harass or do anything that could alter their normal behavior. So, when it comes to touching manatees or trying to swim with them, it's okay to view from a distance. It's okay to be in the water in the same area with them. A lot of times there's not a whole lot you can do about that. You may be swimming and a manatee may come swim right by you. And so it's best just to, view them from a distance and to just appreciate that. But we definitely don't want, swimmers or boaters trying to touch them, trying to feed them, trying to give them fresh water, trying to ride them. Unfortunately, we've had incidents where...
Oh, my goodness. Wait a minute. What?
I know.
How do you ride a manatee?
As crazy as that sounds. As crazy as it sounds, there's been videos that people have taken where somebody's tried to get on their back, and that is just very stressful to the animal.
Sure.
It's also very dangerous because if you've ever seen video of one of our rescues, whenever we're trying to rescue a manatee, they are very, very powerful animals, and when they move their tail, it is something that could very seriously injure somebody. And so it takes a lot of people and a lot of help to try to wrangle in one of these manatees whenever it needs to be rescued to then be rehabbed. And so that's another thing we want to remind people is not only is it illegal, but it could also be dangerous, not just for the animal, but for humans alike.
So is the population healthy?
It is. it's hard to say. I mean, they still have a protected status, and and obviously this doesn't help, but they're doing fairly well. I mean, if you look at numbers from years ago and population estimates, the trend is improving.
How do you keep track of them? Like, how do you know how many are out there? Are you tagging them somehow, or how do you keep the numbers?
Yeah. It's kind of a variety of different ways, and honestly, this is a question better suited for our biologists, but I can answer it somewhat. Whenever we do a rescue, a lot of times we will put an insert a tag. That way we can track them, and if we do have to rescue this animal again, then we can kind of know the history behind the manatee. Another way they do it is aerial surveys. Especially in the wintertime, they can go up in a helicopter or an airplane and fly around and look at where they're congregating and get visual.
We lost them.
Uh-oh.
Still there, Brian? Oh, well, dear, you start.
All right.
You read off the numbers there.
Hang on, folks. So,
I think he's trying to
yes,
call.
I printed off the numbers this was from the Florida Wildlife Conservation website, and year to date for 2019, the total, this is not just Lee County, but the total in the state is up to 340, and that total is the 5-year average. So we're already at the 5-year average. There's been 90.
Whoa.
Hey, Brian.
We got disconnected.
Welcome back.
I don't know what happened.
That's all right. I was just reading some of the numbers off the website that had the time period from January 19 to July 19th, and for the year 2019, the total. And obviously this is for the state, is already at 340 deaths, which is the 5-year average. So it's a serious issue, the number for this year.
It is, and here in Lee County, it is the highest in the state, right at 22 for that same time period, which unfortunately is the highest in the state. And so that's why we're really trying to remind folks to pay attention to the signs, because honestly, that's one of the things we really notice is whenever we stop a boat, when we're out there doing these patrols, we'll stop a boat that's going too fast in a designated manatee zone, and we'll say, did you happen to see the signs that you just drove past? And a lot of times they say no. And whether or not they did, it's hard to tell sometimes, but just a general rule is when you're boating, anytime you see a big white sign with some sort of orange circle in the middle or some sort of shape, there's usually good information on that sign. And in this case, in our area, if it's a white sign with an orange circle, it's usually got some sort of manatee zone information. It's going to tell you exactly how you should be operating your boat, and it may be 25 miles an hour as a speed limit inside of the channel, or it may say slow speed minimum wake. And there's a reason for that. And they've been designated as manatee zones because that's an area where there's a higher number of manatees that either travel through there or there's a good food source or for a variety of reasons. And so that's one of the things we really just want to remind boaters is to pay attention to the signage out there, not just for manatee zones, but just for boating in general. It's a good idea just to maintain that awareness and kind of know what's going on and where you're going.
And for people who, a lot of people come down here and rent boats. So for the places that they're renting from, do those companies, give the information and make sure people that, don't frequent our area or frequently boat are aware of that very issue?
Yes, and in addition to giving out the regular safety information that they're required to, a lot of times they will, and we usually will remind the liveries or the places that are doing the rentals to remind their customers of the manatee zones and give them a general overview of where they can and can't run, a boat or a jet ski or whatever. And there's certain times a year that, they may be able to run on a plane everywhere, and then there's other times of year, depending on the where the manatees are, that it may change. And so that's something to be mindful of, especially down like Estero Bay. Those manatee zones fluctuate throughout the season, depending on where the manatees are. So when places are renting boats, or the liveries, we definitely encourage them to show a map, or at least tell their customers where they can or they should and shouldn't be running, and just educating them about the area and that there's manatees in the area and what to look for.
Now, Brian, is there a certain area in Lee County or on Fort Myers Beach that have more manatees than in other areas that people should be aware?
This time of year, not necessarily. In the summertime and the warmer water, they really disperse. And as I said earlier, anywhere where there's a grass flat, which is a significant food source for them, there you could find manatees. As we get into the colder months and the water starts to warm or cool down, then they a lot of times will start to migrate towards the Caloosahatchee River and some of the warm water sources. And that's why, at the Manatee Park, which is off of the Orange River, there's the warm water discharge there, and they congregate there simply because of the warm water. And in other areas of the state, they go towards the natural springs because the water temperature is warmer there than it is elsewhere. So right now, there's no particular area. But as we get into the winter months, then definitely, especially the Caloosahatchee River, Imperial River, some of these areas where the water can be a little bit warmer, that's where you're going to tend to find the manatees and see them moving to and really remaining there for a lot of the wintertime.
All right. And what other things can people do to help, curb this trend besides the stuff that you've mentioned? Is there anything else?
I think one thing that's a fairly simple fix is just wearing polarized sunglasses. And a lot of times we'll mention this when we're talking about boating safety. Yeah. But, when it comes to trying to minimize strikes with manatees, it really reduces the glare on the water. And especially in these summer months when you've got the really intense sun, if you're going to be driving a boat, it's really important to have polarized sunglasses. And it's amazing the difference in what you can see, and you can see into the water. And so that's a simple fix. Just get a pair of polarized sunglasses, and then as you're driving the boat, you can actually see, sometimes you can see the manatees, you can see them coming up for a breath, you can see their swirl marks, which we call the footprint, from where they're swimming. So that's a simple fix. And the other thing is just talking about this with friends and family as they come to visit, and if they're going to be taking boats out, just reminding them that there's manatees in the area, and just be mindful, especially when they're driving in the shallow grass flat areas.
So Brian, it's important not only to go slow, but to look for them, because there's a slight chance you're probably going to see one. So not only go slow, but like you say, keep your eye out for the manatee that might be in the shallow water, correct?
That's correct, because they can submerge for a certain period of time, but they'll come back up, and you'll see their snout and their nose above the water to take that breath. And sometimes you'll see their back, as they're swimming through, especially in the shallow water. So it is definitely something you can see. Sometimes they'll be traveling in herds, where there's 4 or 5 manatees together. And you can definitely see that. And as you get close, especially if you're in shallow water, you'll definitely know that they're there because they're going to do their best to get out of the way. So there'll be a lot of commotion in the water. There'll be a lot of splashing. And at that point, it's best just to back down, make sure they're out of the area, and then you can resume. But one thing we want to remind folks is if they unfortunately do happen to hit a manatee, we want to know about it, because the quicker we can get out to that manatee and assess it with the biologist and determine if it needs to be rescued, that's going to be best for the manatees. So even if they're in a manatee zone where they may have been going too fast, that's not the primary focus at that point. The primary focus shifts to saving this manatee. And the quicker we can get out to it, and if we have to rescue it, the quicker we can do that, the greater chances of survival for the manatee.
So if I see somebody that hits a manatee, can I make a citizen's arrest?
Oh, jeez! Please don't encourage him.
I'm not going to recommend that. But if you do see that, especially if you notice anything in the water, or if it seems like the manatee is acting differently after that, then definitely give FWC a call at the number I mentioned, star FWC, or our Wildlife Alert hotline, because we can at least get an officer out there to try to assess, if this manatee needs to be rehabbed or rescued. They are very resilient animals, and like I said earlier, it's not uncommon to see very old, mature manatees that have evidence of being struck by vessels before, which is very sad, but at the same time, they can be resilient. But unfortunately, the blunt trauma, or if it's a very severe hit, it can be deadly to them.
And just give people an idea of the fines, that can be levied if they're not, if they're found to be doing something that they shouldn't be doing and doing it more than once.
Yeah, so the fine for violating a manatee zone or going too fast in the manatee zone in Lee County is $88. That's our standard fine.
Okay.
If it's something where they're harassing or doing something intentionally to the manatee, that actually moves up to a misdemeanor, and that's a criminal charge, and it could be a $500 fine or 60 days in jail if it's intentional. Harassment or something like that. And there's also, in certain areas in Lee County, there's federal manatee zones, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife patrols those in addition to FWC. And depending on the circumstances, the federal fines are even higher. I don't know off the top of my head what they are, but a lot of times that requires a court date before the judge to assess the fines. And so that's something to be mindful of. And they can be significantly higher than the $88.
Great. I mean, not great, but it's good to know. I mean, it's good to let people know. And you guys are like the state police of the water. Then that's kind of how that works.
Yeah, exactly. We do work for the state of Florida, and in our primary patrol areas are the woods and the water. And so, we work to protect Florida's natural resources and the public. But we work in the areas and we enforce the laws in areas that traditional sheriff's office or police departments don't typically have access to. And so that's why, this is something that's very important to us because there's not really any other agencies that are out there doing it, protecting Florida's wildlife. And so that's why we take it so seriously. And if it's something that we know we can help address and help curb and try to reduce this trend, then that's something we're going to do. And so it starts with education and doing things like this and outreach. But if we have to cite somebody and if it's a repeat offender, then we'll do that as well, because the ultimate goal is to get people to slow down, pay attention, and help reduce the number of manatees that are being struck by vessels.
And I have one last question for you. As far as education goes, I know that there's a very active group for example, the turtles. There's a very active group for the turtles. Is there also a group for the manatees that educates people in addition to what you guys do at Florida Fish and Wildlife?
Yes, and there's a few different ones, and honestly, I don't know them off the top of my head. But one way that the average citizen can help out is purchase the manatee license plate. When you go buy a new license plate or you have to renew yours, there's actually a manatee designated one, and that money goes into manatee research and protection. And so, if somebody doesn't necessarily have the time to volunteer or do certain things, they can simply just buy a manatee license plate, and that money will go directly to manatee research and protection. So that's something to help out. There's other manatee organizations that do work to educate and advocate for their protection. Like I said, I don't know them off the top of my head, but I know there are numerous ones.
So, folks, if you see somebody harassing a manatee, do not make a citizen's arrest. Call 1-888-404-3922. Is that the number, Brian?
That's correct. Yes, and
cool.
we don't recommend approaching it. Obviously, if they want to and they want to say, hey, you shouldn't do that, and the person complies, we don't want anybody to get into an argument or an altercation over this. That's why we're law enforcement and we're capable of handling those things. But if they do see that, we want to know about it. And we get a lot of reports of Facebook or Instagram videos, and those are things that we can pursue as well. So, unfortunately, some of it is intentional, and those are all obviously people we want to catch. But a lot of it is just raising awareness, and as people are out there boating, and especially in new areas, just paying attention to where they're boating. There's maps you can access online at myfwc.com that'll actually show the manatee zones in certain areas of the state. And so that could be a helpful tool before you get out, just like you would if you were looking for channel markers or shallow spots. You can also know where the designated manatee zones are. So that's another tip.
And people should call if they see a manatee that's in trouble as well.
Yes, if you see a manatee that appears to have trouble submerging or sitting at the surface for a long period of time, and obviously we don't expect the average citizen to be able to diagnose whether or not a manatee has issues. So we'd rather know about it, and then we can relay the information to our biologists, and they can ultimately make the decision as far as whether or not we need to check it out. Because sometimes, they do certain things, and it may seem abnormal to the average person, but actually, especially when it comes to mating and things like that, it may seem out of the ordinary, but it's actually very natural for them to do. So we'd rather somebody call and us not have to respond than not know about it and not be able to get to the manatee in time.
All right, Brian. Well, we appreciate your time very much. That was very informational. We're going to make sure we include all the information, like the phone number and the website and the fines, and don't do a citizen's arrest and all that stuff in our notes. And
Yeah.
we'll make sure that that people are aware of what's going on out there in the water.
Great, and we appreciate you having us on or having me on, and I apologize for the phone issues earlier. But I appreciate the opportunity to share some of this information with the public.
No worries. Thanks a lot,
Thank
Brian.
you.
Have a great night.
All right, take care.
Okay.
Bye.
Well, that was very nice. You
That
did a
was.
lovely job. You were very well prepared.
I know I got caught up on a little word there. Every once in a while I get stuck on a question.
Well, we'll
but
practice that.
Yeah. I'm a novice compared to you. And your
Well,
silly
you
question
should have-
about the citizen's arrest.
Well,
that
you
was
never know
ridiculous.
sometimes, and you really should never, ever take the law into your own hands. You should
No.
always call the authorities.
No. And you shouldn't approach wildlife, whether it's in the water or that poor little girl who got hit by that bison
yeah.
out in Yellowstone.
Wow.
I was
How did
out
the-
there.
What was the
I'm
story
telling
on
you,
that? How did she get so close
because
to the bison?
people get out of their car because they want to get a picture. I saw it last year when I was out there. I yelled at some people, "Get away from the buffalo. They're going."
Was it a buffalo or a bison?
No, that's not exactly the same thing, but they are very similar. But actually, when we were out there, a helicopter had landed, and it was taking somebody out. A guy got gored by the buffalo, by the bison, and had to be airlifted out because you cannot get close to them.
No, bad idea.
Bad idea. And don't ride a manatee. What idiot is riding a manatee?
I wonder if we should Google riding a manatee
No,
right now
I don't
just
wanna
to see if
see.
anything comes up like that.
No, you'll go out and do a citizen's arrest.
All right. You did a lovely job today. Thanks again to Brian Norris, episode number 68. He's the Public Information Officer for the Florida Fish and Wildlife Division.
It's actually Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission.
Okay.
Started
He is the law
1999.
enforcer. The number again to call if you see somebody harassing a manatee, or if you see a manatee in distress, not mating, in distress, call 888-404-3922, or you can go on myfwc.com and get more information.
And I think he said, or pound FWC.
Oh, okay.
So, there you go.
All right, folks, thanks again for joining us. We'll be back soon with another thrilling episode of Beach Talk Radio.
Save the manatees.